who probably doesn't want to hear me anyway. So, but I just want to know if you can't hear anybody, just signal. I would really appreciate that. Good morning, everybody. All right, good morning. That's it. Good morning. Thank you. Thank you, Sharon. Good to see you. I really want to welcome everybody to our Freight Press Conference. My name is Congressman Alan Lowenthal. I want to thank the members who are here, Representative Brenda Lawrence. I'd like to really thank some of the people. I'm not going to get there. Are members of many different offices, people who are en route to the Capitol but are not yet here. We have from Dana Rohrabacher's office, my original co-sponsor, Mark Buchan's office, Judy Chu's office, Representative Rush's office. We also have, speaking later on, will be after me, Leslie Blakey for the Coalition for America's Gateways and Trade Corridors, Hassan Ikrada, who I've known for many years from the Southern California Association of Governments, SCAG, Rick Cameron from the Port of Long Beach, and Sean Egan from the Port of Tacoma. And also, I have notes, I'm not going to mention everybody, but Pete Nonis from the American Society of Civil Engineers is here. I'm really pleased to have Pete here. Also, they just kind of supported our bill last night. And David Lipperdijk from the Port of Los Angeles is also, and many other people are here from different ports. You know, we are here today because Congress has less than 2 months in order to reauthorize MAP 21, or hundreds of transportation projects throughout the nation will be thrown into funding limbo. So that's the first step. We're also here to end the politics of postponement and deferral when it comes to transportation planning. We're also here specifically to call for the inclusion of a comprehensive freight infrastructure program in MAP 21. That includes, and I repeat this, that includes a dedicated, a protected, and a sustainable funding stream, a revenue source to fund freight projects throughout the nation. This is not a bold statement that I'm making. This is just common sense. And it should be universally bipartisan, and if you've looked at the sponsors, we are already a bipartisan bill to begin with, and we're going to get more on both sides of the aisle. You know, according to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, freight bottlenecks on U.S. highways cost more than 243 million hours of delays in moving merchandise annually. These cost truckers about $6.5 billion annually, and untold costs to the businesses that are waiting for their goods to get to market. For example, Nike alone spends $4 million a week to carry an extra 7 to 14 days of inventory to compensate for the congestion in the nation. Our country can no longer afford to avoid investing in our freight infrastructure. That is clear. It's long past the time that a national freight infrastructure program that really addresses the multimodal challenges of goods movement and that has a dedicated, protected, and sustainable revenue source is needed. And it's long past that time, and that's why I introduced, along with my co-sponsors, House Res HR 1308. This bill establishes a national multimodal and sustainable freight infrastructure program. It also establishes a freight trust fund, critical to have a trust fund in there, and a freight revenue source which will provide $8 billion annually to freight infrastructure. What does that mean? It provides both freight formula grants to states and competitive grants to both local jurisdictions, to ports, to regions, as I mentioned, to cities, to states, and throughout the nation in terms of who can apply for competitive grants. It requires every state to develop a state freight plan. HR 1308 gets a little prescriptive in saying that we got to get all those stakeholders at that table. So to do that, to develop these plans, we're talking about local and regional governments. We're talking about business. We're talking about labor. We're talking about environmental interests. We're talking about trucking. We're talking about rail. We're talking about ports in the development of a plan. Everybody has got to be at the table, and even if you're going to apply for formula grants, you've got to have your state plan in place. Critical. These state plans will determine which projects get built and how we're going to maintain, which projects are going to be maintained and fixed. The grants will pay for freight on roads, on rail, on multimodal connectors, on first and last mile projects, and on grade separations. Now, where will this revenue stream come from? It will be derived from a small, and I emphasize, 1% user fee on the cost of transporting goods throughout the United States on our ground transportation system. That means if a cargo owner has to pay $1,000 to move to hire a trucking company or a rail company to ship their goods, let's say from Los Angeles to Chicago, they have to cost them $1,000. They will pay into a national trust fund, into the Freight Infrastructure Trust Fund, $10. That's it. And that will be locked down in a trust fund to go to build the infrastructure. We think it's fair, we think it's equitable, and it's definitely sustainable. And we have secured in the bill the trust fund in H.R. 1308, so the funds are dedicated solely to freight infrastructure, cannot be taken for any other purpose. The results is that reality says there is no painless or magical solution to this problem. It's going to take all of us working together, and it's going to require a long-term investment. That's why we're here, to let the Congress know it's critically important to do that investment. Now, I am very pleased to introduce my colleague from Detroit, Michigan, the Representative Brenda Lawrence. Congresswoman Lawrence.
Good morning. I'm glad to be here today at this very important press conference to address an issue that's critical not only to the business community, to the residents of my district in Detroit, but also to the entire state of Michigan and to this nation. After a decade of neglect, due largely to the impact of our Great Recession, our roads, our highways, our entire infrastructure has reached a critical point. As you know, these conditions did not materialize overnight. As a former mayor, I know that there are no Democrat or Republican roads, and there are no Democrat or Republican potholes. That is why one of my final acts as mayor before coming to this great capital to work as your congressperson, I work with local, county, state, and federal government in a bipartisan manner to address the conditions of the crumbling and deteriorating roads in my city. I want to tell you, this road is Greenfield Road. It's a major artery that runs through my district. And due to the high volume of traffic, the road was notorious for having craters, not potholes, craters, size potholes, and suffered from heavy congestions. Last November, voters in my city where I served as mayor approved a $99 million road repair bond to address the crumbling infrastructure and increasing congestion, like the one we have on Greenfield Road. The vote was critical to support the continued growth of businesses. So when we talk about our roads, ladies and gentlemen, we cannot separate economic development and our businesses. Because of this investment, a cloud computing company, Covercent, moved to my region. The bonds also help to address the need for less congestion on our road for our citizens who need safe and convenient access to jobs, schools, and businesses. I point out this achievement because it underscores what I and my fellow members of Congress must do today. We must work in a spirit of bipartisanship to provide all of our constituents with the highest quality of roads. As one of the original co-sponsors of H.R. 1308, Economy in Motion, the National Multimodal and Sustainable Freight Infrastructure Act, I'm confident that we can work toward addressing this issue and reversing a national trend in our crumbling infrastructure. This bill has many strong points, but among the most important is that it focuses on generating funds through a reasonable and responsible way bill fee, calculated at 1% of the transportation costs of the goods. It also provides a competitive grant program open to all local, regional, state governments and designed to find innovative and effective solutions to this universal problem. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what our constituents want. They want us to work together, regardless of what side of the aisle we occupy, to find practical solutions to drive our economy recovery forward. Let's give them what they want. Let's give them what they deserve. They want our districts and our states to succeed so that we can continue to grow our business base and promote prosperity and health in our countries. This bill is important. Congress, I am asking Congress to join us in making sure that we do what we were sent here to do and to take care of the health of our communities and our nation. Thank you. Thank you, Representative Lowenthal.
Now I'm pleased to introduce Leslie Blakey, who is the Executive Director for the Coalition for America's Gateways and Trade Corridors. Leslie, thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Lowenthal, and thank you also to Representative Lawrence for being here today and talking about these important needs around our country. We want to thank you for giving us the opportunity also to be heard on these critical needs and for recognizing that freight can't wait. I use the word courage in connection with a bill like this because it takes a great deal of courage for two members of Congress in a Congress that's famous for saying no to anything that would raise money for our public needs. It takes courage to stand up and say, yes, we do need a bill that will provide both the programmatic structure and provide the funding for the dedicated kind of infrastructure that we need for freight and goods movement. One of the things that's most important about this piece of legislation is the fact that it plans to pay for important projects, the bottlenecks and the critical infrastructure around our country that move our goods. The shippers, the cargo owners, the retailers, the manufacturers, all those whose goods are being moved and would be paying, as you pointed out, a very small, thin fee, are already paying anyway. They're paying in dysfunction. They're paying in the choke points, in the holdups of their goods, and in the problems that they're encountering with trying to get their goods to market. So paying a small fee to relieve all of that will actually, in the long run, save them money. Our goods movement infrastructure is the circulatory system of our economy. When it stops moving, business starts having a heart attack. We are 9 months into the worst economic crisis that most Americans haven't even heard of. Economist Walter Kempsey has studied the, quote, West Coast congestion crisis and declared that it is in fact a generalized gateway crisis and very much related to the lack of infrastructure and connections that allow our freight to flow unimpeded. It was triggered first on the West Coast, but it can and is happening at any of our major trade gateways. It is as much about our own products that can't get out to world markets as it is about the goods on megaships coming in. The problem that we are facing here has many facets, but the one that's most important for the federal role is the investment that we are not making to keep up with the rest of the world. This is the infrastructure that allows our businesses to compete. Freight can't wait. But one of the most important aspects is that the infrastructure projects that are important to our freight movement are not well understood. Our coalition has been talking about this for many years, but we have just produced a new booklet that outlines and details a number of freight projects around the country that explain to both Congress and the public what we mean about the projects of national significance that are freight projects that are the lack of these projects is holding up goods around the country in many, many different places. So we'll be distributing this brochure along with our Follow That Freight brochures to illustrate how freight moves, and we'll be distributing fact sheets and other materials throughout the coming months to members of Congress to help understand why this program that's called for in the HR 1308 is so important. Freight can't wait. I want you to think about if for a number of our coalition members and others that are here represented here today that can talk about some of these projects and other freight needs. So I want to encourage members of the media to speak to any of these folks that are here. We have Port of Tacoma, Port of LA, Port of Long Beach, Southern California Association of Governments. I want to recognize my colleague back here from the Great Lakes Dredge and Dock that serves on the Advisory Committee for Supply Chain Competitiveness over at the Department of Commerce. Mort Downey, who's our founding chairman of the Coalition for America's Gateways and Trade Corridors, and has worked on both the actual production and financing of many, many important projects around the country. So we have wonderful resources for you here today that you can talk to about these projects. So the Freight Can't Wait program is one that we're going to be using to support the bill that Representative Lowenthal and Representative Lawrence are putting forward along with their many co-sponsors, and we'll be working to get more co-sponsors for this bill. I want to thank you very much and thank especially both our leaders here for your courage and leadership. Thank you.
And now I'm pleased to bring up Hassan Ikrata, who is the Executive Director of the Southern California Association of Governments, commonly known as SCAG. Hassan, good to see you, my friend.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Lowenthal. Thank you, Representative Lawrence. Good morning to all of you. My name is Hassan Ikrata, and I am the Executive Director of SCAG, which represents 18.4 million people. We support fully Congressman Lowenthal's Bill 1308. We are a house to the largest port complex in the United States, the fourth largest in the world. I've known Congressman Lowenthal for a long time. And in California, when he was the legislator, for the first time in the history of California, we had a bond, a 1B bond that dedicated $2 billion to invest in freight. And that was a great thing to have happened, and I appreciate that, Congressman. It takes leadership like this to do the unpopular thing. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are ranked number 17 in the world when it comes to freight infrastructure. And you ask yourself this question, for a great nation like ours, do we want this ranking to be there? 17th is not a good ranking. We want to be number 1. We want to be able to compete in the 21st century. We want to be able to deploy the technologies that's unimaginable a few decades back. And to do that, we need funding, resources, we need partnership. And what Congressman Lowenthal bill is offering us some of that. The ranking of 17th in the world is no longer acceptable. Our region, working with our ports and partners, identified $50 billion of needed investment right now to be able to compete in the global market. And this bill is so important to us in California and Southern California. This bill talks about partnership between the nation and the states, the nation and the region. And I hope we all support it. Like the Congressman and Representative mentioned, it's not a popular thing these days to talk about anything related to new revenues for transportation. It's not popular at all, regardless of who speaks. But it is leadership. We shouldn't wait for a tragedy to happen to say, oops, we need to fix infrastructure. And I can give you examples of tragedies everywhere that happened because the lack of funding, the lack of work on infrastructure. So we joined today on behalf of the Southern California region, on behalf of the 18.4 million people, thanking Senator Lowenthal, Representative Lawrence for this great work. I thank Leslie for her work in the collaboration with our region, and I hope we continue to work across the aisle to make sure that not only this bill passes, but we do continue to have national policies to be able to compete and bring our ranking from 17th to number 1, which we think we deserve. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Congressman.
Thank you, my friend. Just before I introduce our next speaker, I'd like to also recognize Harry Mayfield from USC, Metrans, Kevin Jones from the Alameda Corridor East, and Jim Hausner of CMANG. Thank you for being here also. I'm now pleased to introduce Rick Cameron, who is the Managing Director of Planning and Environmental Affairs for the Port of Long Beach. Rick, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Rick Cameron. I am the Managing Director of Planning and Environmental Affairs at the Port of Long Beach. Congressman Lowenthal, Representative Lawrence, thank you for having me here today to discuss the importance of providing funds to address the nation's critical infrastructure needs. The Port of Long Beach is a leading gateway for trans-Pacific trade, handling more than 180 billion worth of cargo a year and supporting more than 1.5 million jobs nationally. The port is in the midst of a 10-year, $4 billion capital improvement program to upgrade terminals, bridges, waterways, roads, railways, and other infrastructure. We are developing solutions to integrate the supply chain, making it faster, more efficient, and reliable. Federal funding to augment our investments is critical because international trade accounts for 30% of the U.S. economy. To grow the U.S. economy and compete in global markets, America needs an efficient and modern freight transportation infrastructure system, including seaports and land and water connections into and out of port facilities. The ability of the Port of Long Beach and seaports throughout the country to handle current and future international trade volumes depends on a regional and national transportation system that operates efficiently, safely, and competitively. In developing reauthorization and transportation funding legislation, Congress should be mindful of growing competition of Canadian and Mexican ports for the U.S. port business, and the need to ensure that new laws do not negatively impact U.S. seaports. The Port of Long Beach is supportive of the innovative efforts to assist in funding freight and transportation projects. H.R. 1308 is a step in the right direction, and we look forward to working with Congressman Lowenthal, Representative Lawrence, and others here on Capitol Hill to address solutions to meet national infrastructure needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final speaker to address us this morning is Sean Egan, Government Affairs Director for the Port of Tacoma. Sean.
Good morning. Again, my name is Sean Egan. I'm here today on the behalf of the Port of Tacoma, located on Puget Sound in the state of Washington. The Puget Sound is the third largest gateway for containerized cargo in all of North America. In fact, cargo originating from or destined to 49 of the 50 states passes across our docks. I also represent a state that is incredibly trade dependent. 40% of jobs in Washington state are somehow connected to trade. So as a result, investments in freight and our trade corridors is an important priority for both the Port of Tacoma and the citizens of the state of Washington. A freight-specific competitive grant program like the one proposed by Congressman Lowenthal will allow places like the Port of Tacoma to compete for federal investment that is so needed in our particular community. A particular concern for us in the Pacific Northwest is the completion of State Route 167. This highway connects our marine terminals to the second largest distribution center complex located on the West Coast. Unfortunately, there is a 6-mile segment of the highway that is yet to be finished. Having an opportunity to be able to partner with the federal government through a dedicated freight fund will allow the Port of Tacoma, the state of Washington, and the federal government to be able to complete this highway. And the opportunities associated with that are fantastic. The Washington State Department of Transportation estimates that the completion of State Route 167 could generate 80,000 permanent jobs and $10 billion in long-term salaries. This is just the type of investment that is needed not only in Washington State, but our region and indeed the nation overall. So I'd like to thank Congressman Lowenthal for having the courage to be able to introduce this legislation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sean. Well, thank you. I just, in closing, want to say I'm going to add a little bit of more severity or gravity to this need and announce that later on today, the American Association of Port Authorities is going to be holding a press conference. They're going to announce the release of a study that has just been done on the impacts of our economy from the lack of freight infrastructure. This is timely because what we're going to find out is that between 2007 and 2013, the impact of American seaports increased by 43%. It was an increase of $4.6 trillion in the U.S. economic value. That was just the increase in trade. We do not have the infrastructure to handle that trade. It is growing. We cannot handle that trade. If we're really concerned about the American economy, we will stand up and demand a dedicated, a permanent and safe funding stream that ties to a trust fund that really lays out a program for how we're going to invest in freight infrastructure and brings all the expertise at the local, regional, and state level to this. We really will develop partnerships. Thank you for being here, and let's move on and let's get more co-sponsors and let's get this passed. Let's move America forward. Okay, questions?